If someone had told me 10 years ago that Chloe's gangly, brace-faced younger sister would one day be the axis my entire world tilted on, I would have laughed. I would have pictured Lennon at 13, all knees and elbows, and a painful shyness that manifested as a constant, wide-eyed stare in my direction whenever she visited. She was just the kid sister, a background character in the story of my college years. But 10 years was a long time. The silence in the apartment was the first thing that hit me. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a hollow one, the kind that echoes. Chloe's room was a cavern of beige carpet and unmarred white walls, stripped of the chaotic tapestry of posters, photos, and fairy lights that had defined it for the past 4 years. The air smelled of cleaning supplies and finality. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was Chloe. She's on her way. Key is under the mat like we talked about. Be nice! I stared at the text. Be nice. As if I were some kind of ogre. My reluctance had nothing to do with being mean and everything to do with self-preservation. I just extricated myself from 4 years of Chloe's whirlwind energy, her constant stream of friends, her drama of the week love life, her habit of leaving half-empty mugs in every room like a breadcrumb trail of caffeinated chaos. I was looking forward to quiet, to solitude, to an adult apartment inhabited by an adult. Instead, I was getting Lennon. My memory painted her in flickering, awkward strokes. Lennon spilling a Coke on my laptop during one visit. Lennon getting stuck in the bathroom because the lock was tricky. Lennon sitting on the arm of the sofa, watching a movie with us, her gaze fixed so intently on the side of my head I could feel its heat. She was 22 now, Chloe had assured me. A legal adult. A responsible person with a real job in graphic design. It didn't matter. In my head, she was perpetually 13. I was bracing myself for a different kind of chaos. The shy, clumsy kind that would require me to be a quasi-guardian, a role I had absolutely no interest in playing. I sighed, scrubbing a hand over my face. It was just for a year until her lease was up and I could find a proper roommate. A stranger. Someone with whom I could build a polite, transactional relationship based on shared utility bills and a mutual understanding of whose turn it was to buy toilet paper. The sound of a key scraping in the lock made me jump. I straightened up, trying to arrange my face into something welcoming or at least neutral. Be nice, Chloe's text echoed in my mind. The door swung open and she stepped inside, backlit for a moment by the flat gray light of the hallway. And my brain short-circuited. This was not the girl I remembered. The awkward angles had smoothed into a quiet grace. She was tall, taller than me, with the same dark, wavy hair as her sister, but hers was cut in a sharp bob that grazed. Her jawline, she wore a simple black t-shirt and worn jeans, and her arms, visible as she hefted a heavy-looking box, were toned and dusted with a faint smattering of freckles. The braces were long gone, and her mouth was a soft, serious line. But it was her eyes that held me. They were the same deep chocolate brown I remembered, but the frantic, starstruck awe was gone. In its place was a calm, steady watchfulness. She looked at me, and for the first time, I felt seen by her, not just stared at. Hadley, she says, her voice a little lower than I expected, a little huskier. Lennon. Hey. I managed a small, tight smile. You made it. Yeah. Traffic was a nightmare. She set the box down with a soft thud, her movements economical and sure. There was none of the flailing uncertainty I associated with her. Sorry, I know I'm later than I said. It's fine. No rush. I gestured vaguely toward the empty room. That's you, as you know. She gave a small nod, her gaze sweeping over the living room, a space she'd seen a dozen times before, but she looked at it now with the assessing eye of an occupant, not a guest. Her eyes lingered for a second on the worn armchair in the corner, my chair, the one I was always sitting in when she used to visit. A flicker of something I couldn't read crossed her face before it was gone. I'll just start bringing stuff up, she says. I tried to pack light, but you know how it is. Do you need a hand? The offer was automatic, polite. She looked at the box at her feet, then back at me. A faint smile touched her lips, the first real one I'd seen. It changed her whole face, softening the serious lines. I've got it, but thanks. She turned and disappeared back into the hallway, leaving me standing in the sudden silence of the apartment. My carefully constructed expectations lying in a heap on the floor. The person who had just walked into my home was not a kid sister. She was a woman, and I was completely, utterly unprepared for that. The first few days were an exercise in careful navigation. We moved around each other like two strangers in a library, speaking in hushed tones, hyper-aware of the space the other occupied. I learned the rhythm of her mornings through the thin apartment walls, the soft click of her bedroom door, the whisper of the coffee grinder, the quiet padding of her footsteps. She was impossibly neat. Her shoes were always lined up perfectly by the door. Her single mug was washed and placed back in the cupboard the moment she was done with it. Her presence in the apartment was marked by a quiet orderliness that was the polar opposite of Chloe's cheerful entropy. It was unsettling. I found myself watching her. It was subconscious at first, a peripheral awareness of her movements. I'd be reading on the couch and find my eyes lifting from the page to watch her at the kitchen counter sketching. In a notebook, her brow furrowed in concentration. I noted the way she bit her lower lip when she was thinking, the way she tucked a stray strand of dark hair behind her ear with an ink-stained finger. These were details I had no business noticing. She was my roommate, Chloe's little sister. The box I'd put her in was sturdy, reinforced with years of memory. But the person living in my apartment kept slipping out of it, refusing to be contained. The confession when it came was so quiet and unassuming, I almost missed it. It was a Tuesday night, almost a week after she'd moved in. I was making tea and she was leaning against the opposite counter, scrolling through her phone. Rain lashed against the window, a steady drumming that filled the comfortable silence between us. "You know," she says, her voice casual, her eyes still on her screen. "It's weird being here." I measured out a spoonful of loose-leaf chamomile. "Weird how?" "Just." This apartment was always Chloe and Hadley's place. The cool, older sister apartment. Coming here was like visiting another planet where everyone was smarter and funnier and knew which bands were cool. She looked up, a wry, self-deprecating smile on her face. I used to plan my outfits for days before visiting. I felt a genuine smile surface, my first easy one around her. Seriously? I think for most of those visits, I was wearing the same pair of sweatpants with a paint stain on the knee. "Yeah, but they were cool sweatpants," she says, and the earnestness in her voice made me laugh. "You were the cool roommate, Chloe's artsy, mysterious friend who read actual books and didn't watch reality television." "I definitely watch reality television," I admitted, pouring hot water into my mug. The steam fogged my glasses. My illusions are shattered. She set her phone down on the counter, her full attention on me now. The mood in the small kitchen shifted, became heavier, more focused. I'm glad they are, though. I took a careful sip of my tea. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the worn linoleum floor. She worried the hem of her t-shirt between her fingers. It was the first flash I'd seen of the uncertain teenager I remembered. It's better this way. Being roommates, being equals." She looked back up, and her eyes were clear, direct. There was no hiding from them. Instead of me just being the weird kid in the corner. "You weren't a weird kid," I said, though we both knew it was a kind lie. She let out a soft huff of a laugh. It's okay. I was a weird kid with a massive, mortifying crush on her sister's roommate." The mug stopped halfway to my lips. The rain against the window seemed to grow louder, filling my ears. I stared at her, my mind blank. She said it so casually, like she was commenting on the weather, but the words landed in the center of the room with the force of a physical blow. "Oh," I said. It was all I could manage. A faint blush crept up her neck. "Yeah." "Oh." Chloe used to tease me about it relentlessly. I'm pretty sure she only told you I was moving in at the last minute because she thought if you had time to think about it, you'd remember me as the lovesick preteen and say no. My thoughts were a frantic scramble. I did remember. I remembered the staring, the way she'd offer to get me a drink a second after I'd already gotten one for myself, the way her face would light up if I said her name. I'd chalked it up to hero worship, a kid impressed by someone a few years older. I had never, not for a single second, considered it was a crush. A real one. "So," she continued, pushing off the counter and taking a half step closer, "I guess I just wanted to say it out loud. Get the awkward part over with. Because that's not why I'm here." "It's not." My voice was faint. "No." She shook her head, her dark hair swinging. "I mean, maybe it's why I looked up the listing in the first place. But I took the room because it's a great apartment, it's close to my job, and Chloe said you were a quiet, normal roommate." She gave me another one of those small, transforming smiles. "The crush was a long time ago, Hadley. We were kids. I'm not that person anymore." She said the words, and I knew they were meant to be a reassurance. A way of clearing the air and setting the boundary for our new, adult relationship. But all I could hear was the echo of what she'd said. A massive, mortifying crush. And all I could think was that the woman standing in front of me, with her steady eyes and quiet confidence, was 1,000 times more crush-worthy than the college student I had been. The confession changed everything. It hung in the air between us, an invisible, shimmering curtain. Every mundane interaction was now filtered through it. When she said good morning as she got the milk from the fridge, my brain screamed, "She used to have a crush on you." When we passed in the narrow hallway and her arm brushed mine, a jolt went through me that was completely out of proportion to the contact, and I thought, does she feel that? Did she used to feel that? I became a frantic detective of her every move, searching for clues. I was looking for evidence that the crush was truly gone, a relic of the past she claimed it was, but at the same time, a desperate, traitorous part of me was searching for the opposite. Her claim that she wasn't that person anymore was demonstrably true. She was competent and self-sufficient. She fixed the perpetually leaking kitchen faucet with a wrench and a YouTube tutorial, a task I'd been putting off for 6 months. She cooked actual meals, filling the apartment with the scent of garlic and roasted vegetables, and always made enough to offer me a plate. She was also, I learned, deeply kind. One afternoon, I came home from work, exhausted and nursing a splitting headache after a brutal deadline. I must have looked as bad as I felt, because when I walked in, Lennon took one look at me from her spot on the couch, and her face softened with concern. "Rough day?" she asks. I just grunted, dropping my bag and pressing the heels of my hands into my eyes. I didn't hear her get up, but a moment later, a cool glass of water was being pressed into my hand. "Here," she says, her voice low. "Go lie down. I'll be quiet." Later, I woke up from a groggy nap on the couch. The sun had set, and the living room was bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp. A blanket I didn't own was tucked around me. On the coffee table next to my water was a small plate with 2 painkillers and a plain piece of toast. A lump formed in my throat. Chloe, for all her good qualities, would have probably just cranked up her music and told me to take an aspirin. This quiet, unassuming act of care felt profound. It was a gesture of someone who was paying attention, and I was paying attention to her. I learned the landscape of her moods. A slight downturn of her lips meant a client had rejected her latest design. A quiet hum as she worked at the kitchen table meant she was in the zone, lost in her own creative world. I learned that she had a surprisingly goofy laugh that only came out when she was watching old sitcom reruns late at night. I noticed the small personal details, a tiny silver compass tattooed on the inside of her left wrist, the way she always wore mismatched, brightly colored socks, even with her otherwise understated outfits, the collection of smooth gray stones that lined her bedroom windowsill. My internal monologue was a war zone. One part of me, the logical part, insisted that this was just what happened when you lived with someone. You learned their habits. It was proximity, not prophecy. But the other part, the part that was growing louder every day, knew this was different. I'd lived with Chloe for 4 years, and I'd never felt this intense awareness. I had never spent an entire morning replaying a 5-second interaction in my head. We fell into a routine that felt dangerously domestic. We'd often eat dinner at the same time, not by design, but by the synchronicity of our schedules. We'd talk about our days, our conversations easy and meandering. She'd ask about my work at the library, and actually listen to my long, rambling stories about eccentric patrons. I'd ask about her design projects, and she'd show me her screen, explaining the nuances of typography and color theory with a quiet passion that was captivating. One evening, we were on the couch, watching some mindless documentary about deep sea life. The apartment was dark except for the flickering blue light of the television. We were at opposite ends of the sofa, saw BCY, respectable roommate distance between us, but the space felt charged, humming with a low-grade current. During a particularly stunning shot of a bioluminescent jellyfish, I glanced over at her. Her face was illuminated by the screen, her expression one of rapt fascination. Her lips were slightly parted, and I could see the reflection of the pulsing light in her dark eyes. My heart gave a painful thud against my ribs. The thought came, unbidden and terrifyingly clear. I want to kiss you. I snapped my gaze back to the screen, my cheeks burning. It was a stupid, impossible thought. She was Lennon, Chloe's little sister, the girl who used to have a crush on me. She had explicitly told me that crush was over. She had drawn a line. And here I was, years later, a decade older and supposedly wiser, developing the very same crush in reverse. It was absurd. It was complicated. It was also, I was beginning to realize, completely and utterly unavoidable. My fight against the feeling was valiant but doomed. I tried to pull back. I started spending more evenings in my room with the door closed. I made excuses to eat dinner at my desk. I tried to fill the apartment with the static of my own life, to drown out the quiet pull she had on me. It didn't work. Her absence in the living room was a bigger presence than her sitting on the couch had ever been. The silence that had once been my goal now felt like a punishment. The catalyst arrived in the form of a late October thunderstorm. It wasn't a gentle rain, it was a violent, angry storm that threw itself against the city. The wind howled, and the rain came down in solid sheets, blurring the windows into a watercolor mess. We were both home, trapped by the weather. I was trying to read in my armchair, and Lennon was sketching at the kitchen table. The tension in the apartment was thick enough to taste. My deliberate distance of the past week had created a new kind of awkwardness between us, a stilted politeness that was worse than the silence. Then, with a loud crack of thunder that shook the building, the lights flickered once, twice, and died. We were plunged into absolute darkness. Okay, Lennon's voice came out of the black, startlingly close. Well, that's not ideal. No, I agreed, my heart still hammering from the thunder. I could hear her moving, the soft scrape of her chair. Candles? She asks. Do we have any? I think in the junk drawer, in the kitchen. I heard her fumbling around. A drawer opened and closed, the clatter of miscellaneous objects. Then, a moment later, a small, brave flame sparked to life. Lennon's face appeared in the warm, dancing light, her features thrown into soft relief. She held a single, vanilla-scented candle that Chloe must have left behind. Success, she says, her smile illuminated by the tiny fire. She found a few more, and soon the living room was dotted with little pools of flickering light. It transformed the space, making it smaller, more intimate. The shadows in the corners seemed to press in on us. The storm raged outside, a wild soundtrack to our sudden, enforced proximity. She sat on the floor, her back against the sofa, and I took a spot on the rug a few feet away, my own back against my armchair. We were facing each other, the candlelight between us. This is kind of cozy, she murmured, hugging her knees to her chest. Or the beginning of a horror movie, I countered, trying for a light tone. She chuckled. Always the optimist. We sat in silence for a while, just listening to the storm. The careful walls I had been building for the past week felt flimsy in this new, strange intimacy. The darkness made everything feel more honest, more raw. Hadley? She says, her voice soft. Yeah? Are you mad at me? The question blindsided me. I looked at her, at the genuine worry in her candlelit eyes. Mad at you? Why would I be mad at you? I don't know, she shrugged, looking down at her hands. You've just been distant the last week or so. I thought maybe I did something, or said something. Maybe me telling you about the crush thing. Maybe that made things weird. My throat felt tight. She thought this was her fault. The guilt was a sharp, painful sting. This whole time I'd been so wrapped up in my own internal chaos, I hadn't considered how my behavior was affecting her. "No," I said, and the word came out strained. "No, Lennon, it's not you. I promise. It's me." She looked up, her expression searching. "What is it?" Here it was. The precipice. I could lie. I could make up some excuse about work being stressful, and the conversation would end, and we would go back to our careful, polite distance until the power came back on and reset everything to its uncomfortable normal. Or I could tell the truth. The wind rattled the window pane, a violent, insistent sound. My heart was doing the same thing against my ribs. It did make things weird, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. But not for the reason you think. I watched her face, trying to read it in the flickering light. She was just listening, her expression open, waiting. She wasn't pushing, just giving me the space to speak. That quiet, patient consideration was the thing that finally broke me. "You said that crush was a long time ago," I began, the words feeling clumsy and heavy on my tongue. "You said you're not that person anymore, and you were right. You're not." I took a breath, the air thick with the smell of vanilla and rain. "The problem is, I think I'm starting to be." She just stared at me. Her face was a mask of confusion. "Starting to be what?" "That person," I whispered, the confession tearing out of me, the one with the crush. The silence that followed was absolute. The storm outside, my own frantic heartbeat, the flickering of the candle flames. It all faded into a roaring stillness. Lennon's eyes were wide, her lips parted in shock. I saw a dozen emotions flicker across her face in the space of a few seconds. Disbelief, confusion, and then something else. Something I was too terrified to name. I couldn't bear the silence, the weight of her stare. I dropped my gaze to my hands, twisting my fingers together in my lap. "I'm sorry," I mumbled. "I know it's weird. You're Chloe's sister, and you're my roommate, and there's a history, and I've made everything so awkward. I'm so sorry." I was rambling, digging myself a deeper and deeper hole of mortification. I just wanted the floor to open up and swallow me. This was a disaster. I had ruined everything. Our easy friendship, our comfortable home, all of it. Hadley. Her voice was so quiet I almost didn't hear it over the blood rushing in my ears. I forced myself to look up. She had moved closer. I hadn't even noticed. She was just a foot away now, her knees almost touching mine. The candlelight caught the sheen of unshed tears in her eyes. "Did you really think it was that easy?" she asks, her voice thick with emotion. "Did you think I could just turn it off?" My brain struggled to catch up. "Turn what off? You said—" "I know what I said," she interrupted, a raw vulnerability in her expression that stole my breath. "I said it was a long time ago. I said I wasn't that person. And that was true. I'm not a kid anymore. I don't hero worship you from across a room." She reached out, her hand hesitating in the air between us for a fraction of a second before her fingers gently, tentatively touched my knee. A bolt of pure heat shot through me, sharp and overwhelming. "But this," she whispered, her gaze dropping to her hand on my leg, then lifting back to my face. "What I feel for you now, it's not a crush, Hadley. It hasn't been for a long time. I tried to pretend it was, for both of us. I thought it would be easier if I just put it in a box and called it ancient history." A tear escaped and traced a shimmering path down her cheek. "But it's not history. It's been right here this whole time, watching you, living with you. It's been impossible." The world tilted. The air left my lungs in a rush. Everything I had been overanalyzing, every small gesture I had questioned, every moment of tension I had attributed to my own one-sided feelings, it all snapped into a new, brilliant, terrifying focus. It was mutual. It had been mutual all along. I didn't know who moved first. Maybe we both did. The small space between us collapsed, and her hands were on my face, her thumbs gently stroking my cheeks. Wiping away tears, I didn't even realize I was crying. My own hands came up to rest on her waist, my fingers gripping her shirt as if she were the only solid thing in a world that was spinning out of control. Her face was so close, I could feel her breath on my lips, warm and shaky. Her eyes searched mine in the dancing light, and I saw a decade of unspoken feelings reflected there, transformed from a teenager's adoration into a woman's deep, uncertain yearning, a mirror of my own. "Lennon," I breathed, her name a prayer. And then she kissed me. It wasn't a passionate, desperate kiss. It was impossibly gentle. It was hesitant and soft, a question and an answer all at once. Her lips were tentative against mine, a soft pressure that felt more profound than any kiss I'd ever had. It was a kiss that tasted of salt and rain and years of waiting. I melted into it, a wave of relief so powerful it left me weak. My hands tightened on her waist, pulling her closer, and the kiss deepened. Just slightly. It was a silent conversation, a confirmation that this was real, that we were both here, in this candlelit room, finally on the same page. When we broke apart, we didn't move away. We stayed where we were, our foreheads pressed together, our breath mingling in the small space between us. I kept my eyes closed, just trying to absorb the reality of the moment. Her hands were still cupping my face, her skin warm against mine. The storm still raged outside, but inside, in the heart of our little apartment, everything was finally, blessedly, quiet. The power came back on with a sudden, jarring hum an hour later. The lamps flickered to life, flooding the room with a harsh, ordinary light that felt like an intrusion. We blinked at each other, pulling apart slightly, like two creatures startled out of a dream. The intimacy of the darkness was gone, replaced by the stark reality of the living room. My messy bookshelf, her sketchbook left open on the table, the dust bunnies under the couch. Everything was normal, except that absolutely nothing was. An awkward silence descended. My mind raced, filled with the panicked static of the morning after, even though it was only 10 o'clock at night. What now? What did we do? What did we say? Lennon was the one who broke the silence. She cleared her throat, her gaze fixed on a spot on the rug. "So," she says, her voice a little shaky, "my lease isn't up for another 11 months. Despite the tension coiling in my stomach, a laugh bubbled out of me. It was a watery, relieved sound. "That's your first thought?" She looked up at me, and the corner of her mouth quirked into a nervous smile. "It's a practical consideration." "Okay, practical person," I said, my own smile feeling wobbly but real. "What's your second thought?" Her smile faded, replaced by that same raw vulnerability from before. "My second thought is that I'm terrified. I just completely misinterpreted the last hour of my life." My heart ached for her, for the uncertainty in her voice. I reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were cold, and they laced with mine instantly, her grip tight. "You didn't," I said, my voice firm with a conviction that was settling deep in my bones. "You didn't misinterpret anything." Relief washed over her face so completely it was like watching the sun come out from behind a cloud. She squeezed my hand. "Good. That's really good to hear." We didn't talk much more that night. The emotional exhaustion was a heavy blanket, and words felt inadequate anyway. She went to her room, and I went to mine. But not before a long, lingering moment at her doorway that ended with a soft, chaste kiss that was all promise. I lay in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, my hand still tingling where she had held it. The apartment was quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence. It was full. It was humming with potential. The next morning was a study in delicate choreography. I woke up early, my stomach a knot of nerves and excitement. When I went into the kitchen, she was already there, pouring hot water into 2 mugs. She was wearing an oversized gray sweatshirt and sleep shorts, her hair a messy halo. She looked soft and sleep-rumpled and so beautiful it made my chest hurt. She looked up as I entered, and a shy, brilliant smile lit up her face. "Morning," she says. "Morning," I replied, my voice husky. She pushed one of the mugs across the counter toward me. It was my favorite one, the chipped ceramic one with a poorly painted owl on it. I made you tea, she says. I wasn't sure if you were a coffee person in the morning. Tea is perfect, I said, wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic. Thank you. The gesture was so simple, so domestic, but it felt like a landmark. She had made me tea. She knew which mug was mine. It was a tiny thread in the tapestry of a life lived together, and it was the first one we were weaving consciously. Last night, I started, needing to solidify it, to make sure it hadn't been a strange, storm-induced dream. Wasn't a dream, she finished for me, as if reading my mind. She leaned against the counter, cradling her own mug. Her eyes were clear and steady. And it wasn't a mistake, not for me. Not for me either, I confirmed. And the relief was a physical thing, unknotting the tension in my shoulders. We started to navigate the new terrain of us. It was a slow, gentle process. We were still roommates. We still had to figure out whose turn it was to take out the recycling, but now, when we passed in the hallway, a hand would linger on a waist. When we sat on the couch, the respectable distance was gone, replaced by the comfortable weight of a leg pressed against mine. A week later, Chloe called. I put her on speakerphone as I was making dinner while Lennon sketched at the table. So, how's it going with the new roomie? Chloe's voice was bright and loud. Is she driving you crazy yet? Did you have to remind her that dishes don't magically wash themselves? I glanced at Lennon, who had looked up from her sketchbook, her eyes wide with amusement. A silent laugh shook her shoulders. She's fine, Chloe, I said, my voice laced with a humor only Lennon would understand. Very tidy. Hardly know she's here. Lennon snorted into her hand, trying to suppress her laughter. Good. I told you she was responsible, Chloe said, completely oblivious. Just make sure you don't let her walk all over you. She can be sneakily charming when she wants to be. Oh, I'm discovering that, I said, my eyes locked on Lennon's. Her cheeks were flushed, and she was smiling, a real, unguarded smile that made my heart feel like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. After I hung up, she shook her head, still laughing softly. Sneakily charming? She's not wrong, I said, moving to stand behind her chair. I leaned down and pressed a kiss to the top of her head, my lips brushing against her soft hair. I felt her lean back into the touch, a small, contented sigh escaping her. These were the moments that were solidifying us. Not grand romantic gestures, but quiet, stolen intimacies. Going grocery shopping together and debating which brand of pasta to buy. Her coming up behind me while I was at the sink and wrapping her arms around my waist, resting her chin on my shoulder. Me finding a new, expensive brand of chamomile tea in the cupboard that I hadn't bought. We were building a language of our own, a language of small kindnesses and lingering touches. One Saturday afternoon, I walked into the living room to find Lennon sitting on the floor, surrounded by the contents of a single, large cardboard box. It was the last of her things, a box labeled childhood bedroom that had been sitting in the corner of her room, unopened since the day she moved in. I leaned against the doorframe, watching her. She was carefully taking out objects one by one. A stack of faded band t-shirts, a collection of yearbooks, a small, lumpy clay pinch pot, probably from a middle school art class. She looked up and saw me, a slightly embarrassed flush on her cheeks. Sorry for the mess. I figured it was finally time to deal with this. No, it's fine. I walked over and sat on the floor across from her. Finding any treasures? She laughed, picking up a framed photo. It was a picture of her and Chloe, probably from about 10 years ago. They both had terrible haircuts and were wearing matching, brightly colored windbreakers. Only if you count blackmail material, she continued to unpack, and I just watched, a comfortable silence settling between us. Unpacking this box felt symbolic. It was her letting go of the last remnants of the person she used to be, in the place where she was becoming someone new. We were becoming someone new. She paused, her hand hovering over a worn sketchbook at the bottom of the box. She pulled it out, her expression unreadable. She flipped through a few pages, a small, wry smile on her face. What is it? I asked. Without a word, she turned the sketchbook around and held it out for me to see. It was a drawing, A pencil sketch, done with the earnest but unskilled hand of a teenager. It was a portrait of a girl with glasses and messy hair, sitting in an armchair, absorbed in a book. It was me. I stared at it, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me. The girl in the drawing was a stranger, a younger version of myself I barely recognized. But the care with which she had been drawn, the obvious focus and attention to detail, that was achingly familiar. It was the same focus I saw in Lennon's face now when she looked at me. "Wow," I whispered, reaching out to trace the pencil line of the armchair. "I remember that chair. The springs were shot." "I spent a whole weekend on this," she said, her voice soft with memory. "I was trying to get the way the light from the window hit your hair just right." She looked from the drawing back to my face, her eyes full of a deep, quiet love that made me feel seen in a way I had never been before. "I think," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "I've been trying to get you right for a very long time." A lump formed in my throat. I couldn't speak. She closed the sketchbook and set it aside. She reached across the small pile of memories between us and took my hands in hers. Her palms were warm, her fingers interlacing with mine. "I know this is all new," she said, her gaze steady and serious. "And maybe we should be taking it slow, but Hadley, when I'm with you, I feel like I'm finally home." Home. The word resonated deep inside me, settling into the hollow spaces I didn't even know were there. I looked around the apartment, at the pools of afternoon sunlight on the floor, at the half-unpacked box of a life she was choosing to build here, with me. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful. It was full of her. I squeezed her hands, a real wide smile spreading across my face. "Me too," I said, and the words were the truest I had ever spoken. "Welcome home."